Dogs podcast. This is episode 56. Today we're going to be talking about something that I think every dog owner is working towards, having great off-leash control. And today we're going to be chatting about a blog post that's on the mccandogs.com page. Shannon Viljasu, the director of online training, writes these amazing blog posts every week. And you know, from the feedback that we get from our audience, from the readers, from our different communities, Facebook, YouTube, and otherwise, we know that some of these topics really strike a chord with them. And we want to include them on our podcast so that we can have the conversation about, you know, the origin of the story, really understanding why Shannon decides to write these articles and really helping you at home to understand the why behind how dogs think and learn. So with no further ado, let's jump right into the episode. So today's topic is skills for off-leash control. I'm Ken Steep, and welcome back to McCann Dogs. Now, Shannon, these blog posts it's pretty exciting to see the attention that we're getting on a few different platforms. I know we've just started to publish blog posts to Medium, which is a lot of fun, and it's a new place for us to be. But I think what people really find valuable is being able to sort of break it down and understand, you know, maybe why their dog isn't listening to them or why their dog isn't achieving the goals that they want them to. So when we talk about off-leash control, which is something I think every dog owner is working towards, why did you choose to break it down the way you did? What was the factor for you that sort of made you want to write an in-depth blog post like this?
Yeah, so I answer a lot of questions from people about what do I do with my dog. My dog tends to listen really well in the house, but outside in the real world, I can call and call and call until my dog turns deaf. And I thought, you know, I think the biggest problem that people face is the desire to rush through the process and to take the leash off and give the dog freedom before they're ready. And I thought, if we can give positive steps of what we want to teach the dogs before taking that leash off, maybe that will help people to not have such a big gap that they have to bridge, so that they'll be able to put in perspective when they should take their dogs off leash, what skills they should have in place in order to feel confident in doing so, and how much training it really does take to get to that point where your dog is reliable listening off leash.
I know that the first paragraph of your blog post is the biggest mistake that you can make, and yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit on that process for a dog owner who thinks that, you know, if my dog's going to listen off leash, they need to start listening as soon as I take that leash off, and talk about why that's sort of a fractured approach to training their dog.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's the instant gratification society that we live in. We want to just, you know, get this new puppy and then enjoy all of the wonderful things that come along with having a well-trained dog, but we forget to take the time to do all of the training and do all the work it takes to get to that point. So the biggest mistake people make, and everybody's probably already figured out what I'm going to say here, is giving the dog freedom before they're ready for it, because it sets you up for so many negative things going on in this scenario. It sets you up for a situation where your dog doesn't know how to listen. So you don't know how to control them yet because they don't know how to listen. That brings inevitably, it brings frustration, and it will probably manifest itself in agitation, and the dog will read that. And that's going to damage your relationship when you're chasing after your dog, yelling at them to come back to you. You know, those things all damage your relationship. The fact that the dog is learning to ignore you damages your relationship, and it damages your future training. It makes you have to work much, much harder. So there are so many reasons that you really should just take a step back, work with the dog at the stage that they're ready for. And with young puppies that don't know how to respond to the come cue yet, and they don't know how to respond to their name necessarily or listen off leash yet, you need to make sure that you set yourself up so that you're not banging your head against the wall and frustrating the dog in the interim. We want to make sure that we set ourselves up for success, which means a whole lot of management while you are waiting to get to that point where you're ready to take your dog off leash. And that means having a leash, having a long line on the dog, some means of always being able to physically get control because you don't yet have that verbal control in place.
I think it's so easy for us to get frustrated, and if we don't achieve whatever the goal is that we expect. But as a dog trainer, you really know the value of sort of swallowing that anger, pretending everything's great and good and grand, and when your dog gets back to you, I mean, I can think of long before I became a dog trainer, that I'd have an expectation that my dog would come back to me. And if they didn't, then I'd have to eventually chase them down, and I'd be so angry as they're with me. I mean, the mixed messages that sends are just so important to understand. And I think you talk in the next point about setting your dog up to be successful and how you can, slowly introduce your dog to that feeling of freedom off leash. But when we talk about rehearsing those bad habits, they can be so detrimental to your learning. That one or two opportunities for that your dog doesn't listen can be so gratifying for them. And it's something that I know I recently was chatting with a couple friends of mine, and they were talking about how they went to the park, and this is actually something that we talked about on our YouTube channel with the weather seasons changing, and now there's grass and animals and new things to deal with. But their dog had a great response to name, and then all of a sudden he didn't, as these new distractions were around, and they were so frustrated they couldn't believe that it was happening. And I said, well, the first thing that you need to do is put that leash on it and work on that training, but you can't be angry about the fact that he didn't come back, because it's not his fault. It's your maybe hurry to get to that point where he can make that mistake. And I love how you really doubled down on that idea early on in this article. Now, when you talk about the training wheels, we often talk about using things like long lines to get our dogs to listen outside. Talk about the value of the long line and how you can really help your dog to be successful by using it in this scenario.
Yeah, the long line is probably your number one most important piece of training equipment that you will ever use, because, like I said, it enables you to get control of your dog physically when you don't necessarily have that verbal control yet. So what I mean by training wheels is that we don't want to go from having a 20-foot long line dragging on the puppy when we're out, or dragging on the dog when we're out on hikes, to just taking that off and throwing it away. I always tell people to get a cheap long line, and you can actually go to the dollar store and you can buy very cheap nylon or cotton web long lines. And that way, when you go to cut it up, it's not going to be a big hit on your pocketbook. So you can take that long line when it's 20 feet. And I would initially maybe cut off 3 feet. And so now my dog is dragging around 17 feet of long line, and he is not going to be any wiser to the fact that his long line is now 17 feet instead of 20 feet. And I'm still going to keep working all of the exercises that I need to have success. So I'm not at the training wheel stage and just cutting back the long line and hoping for the best. I'm cutting back the long line, and I'm still working really hard on the reinforcing the good behaviors, calling my dog's name, working on attention, working on rewarding the check-in, things like that. And when my dog is successful at 17 feet with great success, I'm going to cut off another couple of feet. So now I've got 15 feet, and I'm going through the same scenario, and then so on and so forth, until I eventually get to the point where I can just throw a little tab on my dog's collar just in case I need to, get his attention or take control for some reason. And then it's a piece of cake to go from that really short long line to no leash at all. And again, the dog is not the wiser. We talk about dogs becoming leash wise or collar wise. There's all these scenarios where dogs will figure out, you know what, when you've got that long line on me, you can get control of me, so I'm going to be on my best behavior. But when you don't have that long line on, I can be a little bit more mischievous. So having that transition just enables you to continue working on all the good things and reinforcing your dogs for all the good choices that they're making without getting into a scenario where they understand completely, oh, you can't catch me when you have that line off. So we create leash-wise scenarios very easily, unfortunately.
I know something that people will often ask is okay, well, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't I just use my retractable leash? Because it will adjust itself to the distance away from my dog. Now, you and I both know the dangers of using those retractable leashes outside of your dog's awareness, but just talk about that for a second, why a retractable leash isn't a great solution.
Definitely. So the spring-loaded action on that retractable leash basically is like a flashing neon sign because it's going to put tension on your dog's collar, and it's a big flashing neon sign that says, "You're on leash. I've got control." And of course, the sensation when we take that retractable leash off and leave our dogs with just a collar on, the sensation is completely different. So again, you might end up creating that leash-wise scenario. Another reason that I personally don't like retractable leashes for having them that far out or for having work with a young dog that might lunge or pull or something of that nature is that the guts of them are generally made of plastic and they do break if there's too much pressure on them. So while there's definitely a time and a place for retractable leashes to be used, we always advocate never in busy areas because those things can burn and get tangled and cause all sorts of grief. Plus, it gives your dog too much freedom and they can be hard to get control of your dog again if they're all the way out and you're trying to pull them back in. You might not be able to do that. But we also get concerned about them breaking and the dog potentially getting loose. So do be cautious about that. Make sure you get one that's rated properly for the right weight of your dog and use it selectively. Use it in wide open spaces where there's not a lot of traffic and people around. I love using it with young puppies when I'm introducing them to water. If I have a dog that's not already dying to get into the water, I can use a retractable leash to, start walking in a little bit and help them learn how to swim. But there's not too many other scenarios that I do use them in because they have such a potential for getting tangled around objects and people and other dogs, etc.
And certainly the idea that the tension on that retractable line, your dog, you'd be surprised what your dog is aware of. We talk to lots of students every week about maintaining that loose leash because some people are feeling like they're quite successful with a dog in a sit at their side, but then you see the clip of the leash is pointed straight up and they're accidentally adding some pressure. And that would be the cue to keep the dog in that sit. Same thing with walking on leash. So be really aware when you're using those retractable leashes. Just know that there is some tension on that line and your dog's likely aware of it. Now, what would you suggest people do practice? What are some of the skills? If someone's working towards complete off-leash control, what are some of the important skills and exercises that people need to be working on at home?
Top of the list, I would say, is response to name. I work very, very, very hard to teach my dog a recall cue. The come cue is the most important cue that I have in my house, but I don't want to overuse that. I want to make sure that my dog stays fresh with it. I want to make sure that he's on the tip of his toes every time he hears that word come, which means that I'm not saying it 30 or 40 times when we're on a hike. I use it if I absolutely need to, and I use it in practice, but the rest of the time I expect my dogs to respond when I call their name. And something that I do a lot of so that I don't overuse my dog's name is I use lots of cute nicknames. Ned gets called Nerd and Noodle Soup and all sorts of silly things. And when I look at him and say Noodle Soup, I don't expect him to turn and look at me. So I'm not using that in a situation where I need him to turn and look at me. But I mean, he usually does, because if I'm talking in his direction, he will usually orient towards me and see what's up and what I'm talking about now. So use lots of nicknames just so that you don't overuse your dog's name, and have response to name be a cue. I expect when I call Reggie or Ned or any of my other dogs, I expect them to turn and look at me, and then I can give them further directions from there. So that response to name would be absolutely top of list, so that if they're wandering off in the bush, you can call their name and get them to come back to you nice and quickly. If they're sniffing something on the ground and you're ready to move on from the area, you can call their name rather than overusing your come command. So response to name, I would say, is absolutely top of the list.
Yeah, I really like that one. And that's something we always remind our puppy Head Start students about, is not overusing their dog's name, because it can be such a powerful cue. And we naturally are going to use it in an emergent situation. So we want it to have value, to be really rewarding when they hear it. Now, the next one that you talk about is stationary control. And I love the impact that having a stay, having a wait, having stationary control, I love the impact it has overall in your dog training. A dog that really understands the formal exercise of stay, regardless of the distractions, it really helps them to be a better listener, understand your leadership, understand to listen to you. I love it. And so talk to us about why it's so important in an off-leash setting.
Definitely. Stays are a very underrated exercise. They are something that I work extremely hard on with my dogs when they're young. And that is because you build emotional control into your dogs with stationary exercises. So, just as you mentioned, that stay being such an important part of your dog's life. If my dog cannot hold a sit while there's a squirrel running by, if my dog cannot hold a sit while food falls on the floor, et cetera, there's no way I'm going to be able to stop him from chasing the squirrel or grabbing that food off the floor when he's off leash. It's just not going to happen. So, or when he's out of the sit, I should say, rather than off leash. It's so important to be able to teach your dogs to have calm responses to things, to stimuli in the environment, as well as to teach them to come back to you when they're called, etc. So we don't stand a chance if we haven't taught our dogs to have that emotional control. We don't stand a chance of being able to call them off the squirrel, etc. So practice your stays. Practice the stays with tons of distraction. And of course, you're not going to start with lots of distraction. You're going to start in a, white padded room with absolutely nothing going on, nothing exciting, and you're going to build in those distractions. So you might start with a stay, step out, 1 or 2 feet in front of your dog and drop a cookie on the floor or throw a toy behind you or something of that nature, and work up to the point where you can have a room full of other dogs and people, partying and having a good time, and your dog holding that sit. And of course, your reinforcement is going to be huge when there's challenging things for your dogs. You're going to make sure that you really reward them heavily. But what we want to do is we want to set them up to understand that sometimes there's distractions in the environment and they're exciting, but they're not allowed to chase or react to them. And that is a really great way of teaching it without having to really battle your way with the dog. As you mentioned, I love how impactful stays are on leadership as well. If my dog has something in his mind that he really wants to do, and I can insist and just, have a gentle insistence, so to speak, by putting him back in that sit over and over and over again, as many times as I need to, until he says, oh, all right, I'm not allowed to. That really helps my dog understand that what I'm saying to him, what I'm asking of him is very important, and he needs to give me his attention and give me his focus so that I can give him further feedback. So I can't express how important those stationary exercises are for building relationship, for building emotional control, and for helping your dogs understand that they really do need to check in with and tune into you when you speak.
The other great thing about them is that they're easy to set up. They're easy to do. You don't need a lot of space. You can practice stays in your kitchen. You can practice stays during commercials if you're watching TV. Similarly, you can practice stays out in a wide open farm field or at the baseball park or something like. I mean, you can just break into a stay session at any point. The other thing I really like about them, and I think part of as a handler or as a dog trainer, our understanding of how dogs learn is that they really understand the difference between right and wrong. It's the gray areas in between, or the mixed information where they start to struggle. It's not as clear. Stays can be so clear. As you mentioned before, your dog needs to remain in position and they'll be rewarded for that. But if they get up, they'll be, you'll take their leash, replace them back in position, and then you can start rewarding them again for making that great choice. I think, as a human, it's such an easy exercise for us to understand how to train our dogs. It's so black and white. And I think the power of the exercise and the impact it has on the dog's control make it the most important exercise that you'll never actually use in real life when we're talking about the stay. The weight is another story. The weight I use probably multiple times every single day. But so if you're looking for more information about our stay exercises, I'll drop some links in the show notes below. The next one, Shannon, that you talk about is the attention exercises. And this is something that we covered, I think, a couple weeks ago on our podcast. Yeah. So we in that podcast, if you haven't heard it, again, I'll drop a link. But I talked about how impressed I was when I was first a student at McCann Dogs to see the instructor's dogs just pay attention, just check in with them all the time. I thought it was such an incredible thing. I thought they were the smartest dogs. And then I came to discover that it was actually a trained skill. And I totally can understand why, in an off-leash setting specifically, why attention is so important. And why don't you talk to us just briefly about the value of attention?
Yeah, definitely. So again, it's one of those things where if you can't get your dog's attention when they're, in a quiet room or when they're stationary or when they're on leash, you're definitely not going to be able to get their attention when they're free and running off leash. So if you've got 3 days, we have a free attention workshop that you can find through our website. I'm sure Ken will drop the link below because he's always so eager to offer that. So check below for the link to the free attention workshop. Um, Attention is so important. To be able to call on your dog and say, hey, look at me for a second, and then be able to give them further cues is such a crucial thing. And again, it really reinforces them looking to you for information, because that reinforcement that you're going to do, building reinforcement for their attention work, is really going to go a long way in their little psyches, and it's really going to go a long way into helping you when they're out and about in the real world and they are making choices and they're potentially able to make the wrong choices. If you've got all sorts of background information on attention and all sorts of history of reinforcement for giving you good attention, that is only going to help when there's all sorts of distractions in the environment.
Kale and I were once out hiking with our dogs, and we had 7 dogs at the time. We were walking with all 7 of them on a trail, and as we were strolling along, we could hear in the distance this rumble. There's like this rumbly sound headed our way, and then as I was trying to figure out what was coming, I saw a pair of little headlights come over the ridge, and I realized it was a couple of all-terrain vehicles. So at that point, we asked our dogs to down, and all of our dogs' bellies hit the ground. We were able to put leashes on everyone. We just asked them to wait, just so that we had more control, because I know that some dogs get pretty stimulated by things like golf carts or moving vehicles that you don't often see. So I wanted to make sure that they could be successful. But what I recognized was the value of your next point. You talk about the random stop, and let's talk a little bit about why that could be such an important skill. For us that day, having a random stop with our dogs was crucial because we wanted to take control of the situation very quickly. We had 7 dogs to manage, which would have been a challenge if they weren't such great listeners, or if we hadn't trained them to listen so well. So let's talk about the random stop just for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. And a random stop can be anything. I will often just tell my dogs to wait, and they will stop in a stand. But the first thing that I teach is a random down command, and I'm really glad to have that. Actually, when Ned was about 8 months old, and we were hiking at a friend's in a field, and there was a fence at the end of the field, and he was running along the edge of the fence, and I didn't realize there was a hole in the fence at the end. And when I looked up, all of a sudden he was on the other side of the fence, and it was on a fairly busy road. So I, of course, immediately for the first few seconds was in complete panic mode, and then I calmed down for probably another 2 seconds, felt like an eternity, and I just told him down because I couldn't figure out where the fence was to get him to come back through. So I told him down, he laid down, and I was able to walk up to the fence and actually heel him on the other side of the fence. I said, okay, get in, let's go. I was on one side of the fence, he was on the other, and he walked nicely tight to the fence as this traffic was whizzing by until I found the hole and was able to, help him get back through. So that random down, because in that situation, come would not have worked. He could not have physically gotten to me because there was a fence in between us, and I needed to keep him from trying to move away from the fence and onto the road. So that random down, just having something that you can rely on as a sudden stationary exercise is so important. And we might have that plan in the works for a workshop coming up as well, because I think that is a really important skill to teach. So just having the ability to stop your dog in motion is such a crucial thing, because you never know what might happen. If there's a deer that suddenly runs into your path, or a coyote or something of that nature, you might not want them to come running to you because maybe that coyote or deer is in between the two of you. You might just want them to stop and hit the deck wherever they happen to be. So that's one of the skills that I absolutely make sure I've practiced a ton of before my dog has off-leash freedom.
Yeah, I can think of one scenario, and as you're talking about that, we were going for a walk, and there was a fence line, and we weren't paying terribly close attention to the dogs because they were all pretty close. And as we scanned around to look for them, one of the dogs had gone underneath the fence, and we were the fence was along a road. There's a great big ditch in between. But when we discovered, it's unlikely that the dog was going to go on the road. But when we discovered that, we two of us at the same time said, "Lie down," and the dog dog hit the deck, just to give us more control. So I do, it's like an emergency chute. If you need it, you can pull it and take more control of the situation. But it's funny that you'd be talking about that, and I'd immediately recall that moment, because there's such valuable skills, all of the things that we talk about. Now, having a dog who loves to listen, who really wants to listen and wants to, do whatever it is that you want them to, is, again, something that you can build. You can build value on listening to you. And a great way that we know as dog trainers to do that is by using tricks. So talk about the value of tricks, which may seem completely outrageous when we're talking about off-leash control, but tricks can play a big part in that.
Absolutely. I just want to say, don't ever forget how nice it is to have a dog that loves working for you. So it's not about all the you musts in the world, because you might create a dog that does listen but doesn't listen happily. You've got to have a good balance of things, of saying you do need to say you must. I mean, there's no question about that in our minds. You absolutely have to say you must come when you're called, you must listen. These are life-saving skills. But we want a dog that is so happy to work for us that we can minimize the you must protocol. So tricks are fantastic. I have a whole blog post all on its own on the power of trick training. And tricks are wonderful because there's really no end product with tricks that you can't realign as you're working through something. I can think of a number of tricks that I've taught my dogs that started out as something completely different than what they ended up being. The nice thing about tricks is that they're so positive, and they evolve, and there's no way to be wrong with a trick. The worst thing that ever happens if my dog is wrong is they don't get a cookie. So it's a great way of pushing my dog to try to understand how to read me and how to work for me. It's a great way of giving him examples of how I am going to expect him to learn. And it's a great way of teaching him to learn. So if I can lure a trick, for example. So I might lure a spin trick or a rollover trick. I can teach my dog to learn tricks by offering behaviors. So I might capture a behavior. For example, Jaden, my first toller, knew how to sneeze on cue. And that was because every time he sneezed, I would say yes. And eventually he figured out that sneezing brought him rewards, and that was a great thing. So I can teach my dog to always be thinking, okay, what did I just do? And as far as offering behaviors or shaping behaviors, tricks are a fantastic way of teaching dogs how to shape and how to offer things. So, all the tricks that you see that you think, how on earth did the person teach that dog to do that? It's usually through shaping, which is just asking for short changes in the dog's behavior, successive approximations of the dog's behavior, so that you can build from a dog that knows how to sit to a dog who knows how to sit pretty, as an example, or to a dog who knows how to chain a bunch of behaviors together. So it increases communication so much to spend time teaching your dogs tricks. And of course, they're so fun as well. We won't overlook the fact that tricks are just a blast, but they're definitely going to help in your training. They're going to help build bond, and they are going to help your dog understand how to read you. And they're going to help you understand how to read your dog and where their strengths are and where you might need to work a little bit harder on one definition of learning.
When you mentioned successive approximations, I think we probably have a portion of our audience who just thought to themselves, I'm not exactly sure what the hell she's talking about. But we do have a workshop that you sort of were talking about before, and that's a great opportunity for anybody to get a free monthly opportunity to receive our workshop in their email inbox, to try things like trick training, to work on things like you sort of alluded to. It's a bit of a secret what comes out each month, but you talked about maybe the random stop might be a good thing to work on in these workshops, and they're totally free. So talk about the random workshop that you've created, or the monthly workshop that you've created for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one being the attention workshop, which is up and ready. You can go and listen to it or go through it right now. Our next month, I will drop the ball. No, it's not the ball. What am I dropping?
I'm not even sure. I mean, if you drop the ball, then yeah, I guess so. I guess it would be drop a hint. Yeah, sure.
And
that works for me.
Moment the podcast derailed. So on April 1st, we are going to be releasing a cross your feet trick workshop. So that one is done. It's ready to go. But of course, we're building anticipation and excitement. So April 1st, that one will come out. And then I'm thinking a little bit more along the obedience line for the next one. I really like the idea of the random drop. So that might be the one. You'll have to stay tuned to find out. But every month we'll be releasing a free workshop, around 3 days worth of work. But quick little repetitions throughout the day are going to get you the big win at the end.
And when we talk about offering fun, valuable things for our listeners, I believe Shannon has dropped the mic. I want to thank each and every one of our listeners for joining us today. We really enjoy this opportunity to have conversations about dog training, helping you understand how dogs think and learn. And we've actually put up a Facebook post asking for your questions. Now, if you have any questions about dogs or dog training that you'd like us to answer on a future episode of the podcast, make sure you send us a message. You can at us on Twitter. You can jump on our Facebook page, send Shannon a message. There's all sorts of opportunities for you to reach out and let us know, what questions you might have, because we do these episodes for you, and we really enjoy the opportunity to help you out at home through our podcast. Now, Shannon,
and we love getting your feedback. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do. We love hearing from you, whether you're a listener or a video viewer or a Facebook page follower. We really do love this, the chance that we get to reach out to you. So, Shannon, I want to thank you for joining us here on the podcast today. I want to thank you for all of your blog posts. This is great because we have so much awesome content to dive deeper into and have a conversation about. So if you as a podcast listener at home are also into reading blogs, check out mccandogs.com, because there are tons and tons of blog posts there that you're going to find helpful. If this is your first time on our YouTube podcast, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We publish new videos every single week to help you to understand how dogs think and learn. And on that note, I want to wish you happy training. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.